Thanks for braving the rain to be here. Today we're going to talk about transition planning. So in your organizations, you're most likely about to do elections, or you're thinking about doing elections soon, and that's all well and good, but it's those months right after you do those things that it really starts to become a problem with disorganization and things of that sort for your organization. So we want to touch on some of the basic framework of what we're looking for your organizations to be mindful of in the next few months, but also just the overall conception of, leaving leadership, that, there are thoughts and feelings that you may have as you're transitioning out, whether it's in this leadership position or you're graduating or whatever the case may be, and just to be thinking kind of overall about your role in that and your role in that organization transition. So just a quick story. So I am on the left there with my wife, and then in the middle you have a old gentleman in the hat, and then you have up at the top right this bearded individual who has quite the beard going, and then up at the top you have Coca-Cola, right? So anybody have any idea as to what the connections are there? No, you wouldn't know because you have me and I'm currently here. You have somebody down in the middle there who was really old at that point by the 1920s, and then you have a person up at the top right who lived during the Civil War time. So inherently you would not see much of a connection there, but let me just kind of share with you just a quick introductory story about kind of legacy and passing the torch and those kinds of things. So the person up at the top right, his name is John C. Pemberton, all right? And John Pemberton is the person that created the formula to Coca-Cola, all right? And so he was a pharmacist by profession, but he had come out of the Civil War fighting for the Confederacy, and so he and a lot of his fellow soldiers in the South post-Civil War were dealing with a lot of injuries and not really good medicine to speak of at that point, just morphine and a lot of it, and that's a very addictive drug, so you got a lot of people dealing with that, and it wasn't great. And so he kind of sought out a way for soldiers to be able to cope with that. And so he created the formula to Coca-Cola. It originally was a alcoholic beverage. It was more of like a wine of some kind, but there were a lot of concerns about giving people more or less like liquid medication and kind of walking around that way. But Pemberton really thought of Coca-Cola as being, and his vision, all right, and we'll talk about vision and things of that kind, but his vision was that he really thought that it would be the national drink, at some point. He was slightly off in that Coca-Cola is an international brand. It's the #1 most recognized brand out of any in the whole entire world. Billions and billions and billions of dollars a year are generated, and he, how would he have known, way back in the mid-1800s at what he had? Where Pemberton kind of went wrong is that he had a lot of personal issues, a lot of things that get in the way of his vision. He ended up getting very sick at one point in his life, mainly due to the amount of drugs that he was taking. He was also an alcoholic. And so unfortunately, as he was getting to be really ill and he was broke as well, he sold off the patents. And he sold those patents off to the person down in the middle. That's a guy by the name of Asa Cantor. And he was from Atlanta, Georgia, and that's obviously where Coca-Cola is based. But he ended up buying most of the patents, except for 2 of them, to the Coca-Cola formula and all the rights to that for a pretty low amount of money. In today's money, it would only have been like about $16,000 or so. To what we know what it is now, that's a pretty good deal. I think even Donald Trump would blush at the thought of such a deal. Obviously, I say that in joke, but so with the 2 remaining patents, Pemberton's son also was going through similar health issues and such, and he was broke as well and wanted to make a quick buck, so he sold off the remaining 2 patents to the formula to Mr. Cantor, and the rest is history. Both of the Pembertons at that point in time ended up, passing away very young in life, broke, addicted to drugs and alcoholics. So the connection there to my story and how I link up to that is that he is a direct ancestor of mine. And so I'm here speaking to you right now in this classroom instead of, being an heir to the Coca-Cola throne, if you will. And who knows what would have come of that, but that's just to say that even hundreds of years since then, it's kind of the byproduct of years gone by and what paths could take you, He's a little known fact in all of this story. Most people don't know who he is and will never know who he is, but they do know about Coca-Cola. And so just some missteps along the way, some very shallow, immediate thinking really negatively affected the long-term vision there. And so I'm a product of that even hundreds of years from now, that I'm aware of this story and that it has something to do with my family lineage in some way. And then you have the Cantors, who are on a completely different path that they probably weren't on prior to him getting the deal of, of the century. So this is just to frame a concept of that in your organizations and even in your own individual leadership story, you're going to have times and opportunities and decisions to be made that either are going to affect things in the near term or set you on a path in the long term. And you need to be thinking about both. You need to be serving yourself and your organization in the near term, but what are those decisions looking like down the road when you're gone, and you're not here anymore, and hopefully your organization is around in 50 years. And what's that story going to be like for that organization? So that's just an introductory story. So, there are a lot of reasons as to why organization leaders such as yourself, or just organizations in general, want to leave things better off than when they found them, right? So you have different kinds of motivation. You have intrinsic motivation. That's that internal self-drive. I'm here in this room today and it's raining, and perhaps I'm here because I really wanted to get this information in. That would be very intrinsic. It's the story of folks lining up into the gym in January, trying to get into the gym, and it's their New Year's resolution. Most of that is what we consider to be extrinsic, but those that maybe go to the gym all the time are doing it for their health reasons, or they enjoy it because it makes them feel good, or their general well-being. And those are people that maybe are more intrinsically motivated than those that are starting up their New Year's resolution and then stop around spring break or whatever the case may be. So, intrinsic motivation, for an organization could be made up of individuals that all share the same kind of personal values and goals. So I think it's important as your organization to be aligned in that way. Organizations that are a bit fractured as far as what they deem to be important and more importantly, the goals that they have set for themselves really struggle in transition, because it's more based upon the premise of it's me instead of we. And so when you're done and you're gone, all you cared about was that you were able to get in and get out in a timely way. It's up to everybody else to kind of figure that out. So extrinsic motivation, I talked about that. In your own organizations, it could be that you just don't want to let anybody down. You feel like it's you know, it's like the right thing to do, you know, like this is just something that we have to do, and so we kind of go through the motions, but we get it accomplished. That would be more extrinsic motivation there. You're not wanting to look unorganized, you know, you don't want to look unprofessional, you don't want your organization to be viewed in that way. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just that that's not going to drive you or your organization on a consistent basis. If you're trying to keep up appearances or keep up reputation for everybody else to judge you on, those things are easily to come and go. So, you know, and it could just be like a nervousness, an anxiety, a fear. A lot of times organizations and yourselves have no idea what those consequences could be. You know, and so I get these frantic emails saying, oh my gosh, I didn't register in time, or, you know, oh my gosh, I didn't do this on this deadline, what's going to happen to us? And, you know, my response is pretty kind, you know, that there aren't severe consequences, but we just don't know that until we encounter them. And so a lot of our motivation for things is based upon fear and anxiety. And, you know, it's not as if these are good or bad things. That's why we have both kinds of sets of motivation. We can be both, you know. I can be motivated intrinsically in my career and motivated extrinsically in a lot of other things I do in my life. And that's not to say that one's good or bad, it's just there's a time and place for both. And so think about that in your own organizations. You know, are there times for your organization to be intrinsically motivated by things, or are there times in your organization where, yeah, you know, you're going to sign up to table somewhere because that's going to look really good, or, you know, you're going to, you know, try to raise money because that looks really good on a resume. There are going to be times where you can allow for both, but I would say right now in your transition planning and your elections and things of that kind, it is absolutely important to be intrinsically motivated by not only that process, but what the outcome of those processes are going to be, because most likely you're not going to have a say in that when you're gone. You know, whether you're graduating, you're out of that leadership role, you know, they're not going to come to you and ask questions. You know, that your time has kind of come and gone. And so if there's any time for you to be intrinsically motivated about, you know, the future of your organization, it is right now while you still have a grip on that. Just a quote, you know, legacy is not what's left tomorrow when you're gone, it's what you give, create, impact, and contribute today while you're here that then happens to live on. I think that's really appropriate for what we're talking about, you know, with transition, is that, as what I just said, is that you have an absolute opportunity right now to have a say in how this process goes. You know, when you're gone, people may think kindly of you and, you know who you are for a few months, but then they're going to sleep, you know, and they're going to sleep quite a bit since then, and they're not going to see you on a daily basis. They're not going to get emails from you. And what's left at that point? You know, where's your role in that? There's zero role that you have in that at that point. You've missed that opportunity if, you know, you're just waiting for the, you know, the obituary on your leadership position, you know, like you've waited too long. All right, so you know, when we talk about, you know, legacies to kind of ponder, this is on a very large scale, but just some things to think about. So you know, you have To Kill a Mockingbird, right? And so Harper Lee, she just passed away a few months ago. What a legacy! You know, for the vast majority of her whole entire adult life, she wrote one book, and it happened to be one of the most influential American, you know, novels ever. In fact, you know, for a lot of us, it is our favorite book of all time. It is my favorite book of all time. Monetarily, she was making millions of dollars on a very regular basis just by the royalties of it. Impact would be great. You know, she wrote that book at a time of segregation and a lot of unrest, especially in the South. And she spoke up to some of the issues that were going on at the time. That was very unpopular, but it ended up having a very impactful message. Because of that book, you have the movie. You know, the movie, by all stretches of imagination, is just as well known as the book. And so, I mean, what a legacy to lead. I mean, she released a book about a year ago that a lot of people were kind of hit or miss on. But people aren't going to remember her by the book that was released, you know, when she was, you know, 89 years old. It was going to be To Kill a Mockingbird. And so that's what she left. Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson, we're coming across Jackie Robinson Day coming up is in 2 days. He is obviously widely regarded as the baseball player that broke the color barrier. I would say just on a baseball player alone, there's nothing great about him. He was a really good baseball player, but when people talk about Jackie Robinson, they don't talk about his baseball stats like they would with another baseball player. They talk about the impact that he had on baseball and how that changed the whole entire trajectory, history of the game. I mean, what a legacy. It wasn't about what he did, but it was why and how he went about doing it that were really important. The way that he operated during that time that he was in baseball is really what was impactful. Not that he could hit a baseball or run really fast or play good defense. That had nothing to do with it. Richard Nixon. Now this is one of a legacy that we think is pretty mixed. So if you think about Richard Nixon, you think about him as a president and being a very terrible president at that. Somebody that resigned, and if he didn't resign, he was going to be impeached. A lot of people think about Watergate. A lot of people think about Vietnam. A lot of people don't think very highly of him as a president. The fact of the matter is that post-presidency, he did a lot of really great things. He was viewed as one of the best ambassadors that the United States in our history ever had on foreign relations. He did a lot of really great things for the environment post-presidency. And so, but those things, unfortunately, aren't talked about when we talk about Richard Nixon. And so it's one of those examples of, I really messed it up in my time of leadership, and for better or for worse, I'm known as that. And then you have Steve Jobs. Clearly, probably the best, innovator of our whole generation. Somebody that has his hand on nearly every piece of technology that we have. I see that we all have iPhones here. That's him. That's his vision, what he created, and it started off, obviously back a long time ago, and he's seen it through. And even after his death, they're still trying to carry through his legacy. Post-death, they're trying to still make sure that his vision and his legacy are still alive. And there haven't been too many companies that have been able to really kind of duplicate the innovation that he had. They've probably put out equal products, when you're talking about technology, but they were not the first, to do that in that way. And, people are going to remember him for what he did, not necessarily for who he was. It's a mixed bag on who he was. There were 2 movies released last year devoted to him. Countless books have been written about him. People are kind of mixed on the kind of person he was, but they're not mixed on what he did. And so you have 4 different really large-scale kinds of legacies that you need to think about. Try to kind of personalize them in your own way, your own leadership style, kind of what's going on in your own organization. Do you have these kinds of legacies going around, even in your own personal sense of it? And so just think about those things. So these are things that I think for your organization are really important to be thinking about. You as an organization need to be goal setting. All right, you always need to be goal setting. You need to make them very broad, initially. Where do we want to go as an organization? What do we want to do? If everything went according to plan, where would that leave us, right? Nothing is off limits, right? You don't want to be in a conversation and say, oh, that's never going to work. That's going to stunt the growth. You need to be able to talk through ideas no matter where they're going to take you and see if it sticks. Having simplified goals is quite all right. We want to have X amount of people in our organization starting in 2017. Fair enough. That's pretty simplified. Now the objectives and how you're going to get to that number, that's going to be detailed. But goals, they should be simple. They should be clear and concise. They don't need to be overly detailed. That's where your objectives are coming in. You need to assess the roads to each thing. A lot of the organizations I talk to, they have no idea where they want to go because they've never really looked at where that's going to take them. A lot of organizations want to be a really large organization, but they don't consider what that's going to look like for them. You know, a lot of organizations want to have 8 officers. They don't really realize what having 8 officers would entail. And you're going to get into it right now as you're doing elections in transition. You know, if you have bloated amounts of officer positions, it's not really allowing, you know, yourself to, you know, grow those positions at all. You're kind of handicapping each of them to say, this is all you're going to be doing. You know, these are the tight parameters that each officer position has. You know, a lot of organizations have historian positions. Well, they've only been an organization for 6 months. You know, and so it's kind of like, you know, you need to assess each different road that you want to take, because it's not as simple as just saying, well, yeah, we want to have 8 officers. Well, what is that going to entail to have that? You know, are you thinking about that? In individual leadership, you know, a big thing about transition is that those presidents or those vice presidents, maybe those just 1 or 2 people, have been doing it all on their own. So my question to any of those people is, can you achieve anything of any organizational goal, any personal goal by yourself? And you know, you need to kind of humbly look at this, because I have no problem saying it in my own right, is to say no. You know, you cannot accomplish your goals just by yourself. That doesn't take away from your hard work, your determination, you're pulling yourself up by you know, the bootstraps is what they like to say. It doesn't dilute any of that, but that's to say that we accomplish things as groups most likely. We're given an opportunity to do something. Somebody opened a door for us. Somebody gave us advice along the way. We can't just do these things on our own. We didn't roll out of bed and say, I'm awesome, and go off and achieve all these things. And much like for your organizations, I think organizations that really struggle, especially when those leaders leave, is that it was just those people doing the work. And how do you expect transition if you never empowered anybody else to do anything in your organization? So, you know, in your organizations, you need to be thinking about this on a regular basis. What are ways that I can empower more people? What can I be doing to ensure that when I am gone, we're in good shape? It's not just that we're in good shape while I'm here. We're in good shape when I leave. And that's part of the equation that nobody really gets. They don't want to focus in on the when I leave, because they're having too much fun when they're there. And so just be forward thinking enough about that. You know, and what does your organization plan look like this year, next school year? Big picture, where does our organization want to be in 5 years? Where does our organization want to be in 10 years? Organizations that don't think through that systematically aren't going to be an organization in a year. They're definitely not going to be an organization in 5, and good luck if I ever see them in 10. You know, we have records going way back to the 80s about who's student organizations around here at UNT back in the 80s. I can tell you only a handful of them are still student organizations today. Most of them have national affiliations. Most of them, you know, serve a large subset of our student population, but they've made a way to be here for 30 plus years. I can't tell you how many organizations I don't see, you know, from the fall semester to the spring. You know, that transition is so important, and I will tell you that those organizations that have been around for 30 plus years have this transition planning down. You know, they understand what's going on. It's the organizations that don't spend the time thinking about the long term that are gone so soon. Your organization has to surround itself with good people, right? Like, it's not enough just to be productive. Productivity is great. There is a definite need for productivity. That is a characteristic that I would hope any of you in your own personal lives would hope to be able to say that you are a productive person. But that does not necessarily mean that you're a good person. And we need good people in our organizations. You know, I talk about this a little bit. We have drivers and we have passengers, all right? We identify who our drivers are. It's those people that are the most productive. They are the go-getters. They're the ones that are saying, let's just drive, you know, like, let's keep going. And then you have passengers. Passengers are those that are tethered to the ground. They're saying, wait a second, we don't even know where we're driving. You know, do we have enough gas money? Are we going in the right direction? Or are we just driving ahead? Those people are so valuable to your organization because they provide balance. Any organization that is solely made up of drivers is going to go into a ditch, and those that are solely made up of passengers aren't going to get off the start line. So be thinking about that in your own organization, that you need good, well-rounded people to make this happen, right? It's not just that you accomplish 20 different programs and events. It's that, you know, they made sense, that they were organized, you know, that they had good participation, that they weren't just things you were putting on paper to say that you did, you know, to put on a resume. So, you know, and again, I go back to this. We cannot impact ourselves in positive ways, all right? I will say for myself, I've only been able to negatively impact myself. Anytime that I've tried to take things in my own hands and do things alone and, you know, without having much of a plan, and I just, you know, wanted to go about it on my own, usually it was like mixed results. All right. Now there is something to be said for being true to yourself and following your gut and taking that on. But I would say again, you can't do those things on your own. You can't impact yourself positively. Now other people certainly can, and that's why you need to surround yourself with that. Join into a network, right? So those of you in your student organizations, hopefully you have a good network of other organizations that you can rely upon. I am all for having super organizations. Those are organizations that team up either to form one super group, or they collaborate enough that there's a seamless transition between one or the other. So, you know, just be thinking about that, all right? And just to leave you with, you know, good people may not be the most successful, all right? But they learn the best from their mistakes, all right? So, again, if you're running through any mistakes over this given year, all right, in this transition period, it's so important that you're covering what those mistakes were so that they're not repeated over again. It's not a race to the finish line to say, it's April 13th, I only have a couple more weeks, I just need to get through with it. It is, let's assess what's going on. Like, let's have conversations about what went right and what went wrong. It's not all good. It's not all good things. We need to be, you know, humble enough to be able to share, you know, where our organization went wrong. You know, who you are as a person, as a leader, who you are as an organization, definitely matters. And so, whether you're thinking about doing this as an individual or you're wanting to compel your organization to do this, you need to do a congruency test. You know, you as an organization, who are you when the attention isn't on your organization? Your organization could be great when you're getting people to show up to meetings. You got people showing up to your events. You're raising a lot of money for, you know, for charity. You're doing everything that needs to get done. You are riding high. That's great. But we go through seasons in our organizations. We go through seasons as leaders where we're not impacting a lot of people. We're not feeling that engagement. You know, we're not getting a lot of people listening to us or coming to our things, right? But is that going to deter your organization from going forward? You know, who you are as an organization or as a leader matters more when things are not great and when people aren't necessarily paying attention to you. Because that's really when that intrinsic motivation is going to come through. That's really where your organization is going to shine. Is, you know, it wasn't always great in our organization. We didn't always just kill it out there, you know, but we sustained through. We were consistent. And so, you know, at the end of the day, the question that you as a leader, you as an organization need to think about are to what level is your selfishness? You know, we're all selfish. I make decisions, you know, time to time that are selfish, whether it's to my department or my organization or to myself. You know, it's not that we're all these selfless people that make, you know, great decisions every point in our life. We make selfish decisions at times, but as an organization, does your selfishness outweigh the selflessness? And so when you're thinking about elections, all right, and you're thinking about transition, those two things have to be selfless. You need to have the right leadership in place. It's not favoritism. It's not, well, I'm really good friends with this person, and so I want my friend to have this role. It should be, I'm not necessarily great friends with this person, but this person is the right person to take this role on. And that's a tough decision that you would have to make. That's a tough way to go about it, but that's the mature decision to be made. And then with transition, are you selfish into saying, well, it's finals, or it's graduation, or it's the summer, I'm going to go in a witness protection program. No one will hear from me. The university is dead to me. The organization is surely dead to me. I am burnt out. I need a break. That's all well and good, but I think there's a time and place for that. You will go through that with your own organization, and then ultimately with UNT. You're going to go through a separation period. However, you need to get these things done, all right, before you decide to be selfish. The number one problem that we have going year to year, semester to semester, is that my president left and they didn't give me any resources. They didn't tell me how to do any of this. I don't know what's going on. That organization has pretty much been tanked for that rest of that semester. And all it took was a simple conversation or passing along the resources, or whatever the case may be. It's not hard, but we chose to be selfish in that way. All right, so that's kind of the overarching philosophical, warm and fuzzy kind of thing I want you to think about when we're talking about transition, right? And the importance of the legacies that we leave in our organizations and then in ourselves as individual leaders. It's important to kind of have that in the back of your mind, that be the motivating factor as you go through the actual plan. So, in the best way that I can describe what I'm wanting our organizations to do at this period of time and how you get through successful transition planning is you've identified elections. Now, for those of you in the room, have you done elections?
We were going to do elections, but we had, for the people that are graduating that are officers, we had that exact number of people wanting to be a new officer.
Okay.
So everyone just kind of, it just kind of fit. We didn't wind up having to actually do the voting.
Okay.
We haven't done it yet. We're gonna do it, I believe at our last meeting is elections. And we're supposed to be nominating people, but our organization doesn't communicate very well. So that's
Right.
kind of like where we're at right now. We have no idea like how elections are gonna work.
Okay. So let's take both of these examples. In the example of we had the equal amount of people graduating that that wanted to be officers, replace them. So again, in the near term, this year, that's fine, right? Like it suited the need. What you want to make sure though is that you're keeping record of this, that it's not just passed on class to class, like what you want to avoid is that you don't want people feeling like you have an informal process on how voting happens. So in this year, it just so happened to work out that that's how it went down. But the problem is that if you do that often enough, that time when you really do need to have elections, because you do have, not as much balance, you don't want the overarching philosophy there to be, well, we just kind of take care of it. There's a process, but we've never followed the process, and so it's kind of whatever. So that's why keeping record of your elections, if you don't already, is so vitally important. and then having some kind of a summary as to what went down, right? Whether you're voting and how the voting shaked out, or if you didn't vote and these people were appointed, why that occurred, and why that is different than what your bylaws and the Constitution state. Because, again, long-term, you want to avoid that kind of thing. And so then on the other example about, we're hopefully going to get to it at the last meeting, we don't have great communication going on, we struggle in that way. What you want to avoid is that you show up to that last meeting and nobody is prepared to vote, because then you do the convenient thing, right? Well, you know, we have 14 people that showed up, you know, but our bylaws suggest that, you know, the people present are the only ones that get to vote. So who among you, you know, want to run? You know, does anybody oppose? You know, it becomes this quick thing. Like, we don't communicate very well throughout this process. We get down to the actual vote itself, and we don't know what's going on, and so we're just trying to get this done because we don't have another meeting. So in that way, and I'm not sure what the organization has been doing to try to rectify that, but these are things that you need to cover in August, that you need to routinely be talking about at your meetings. That, you know, just a reminder, a friendly reminder, elections are going to be held on, you know, April 21st. At this time, we're just prepping everybody for this, that nominations are due on this date, and that you have these processes in place well in advance. You might even allow for that to have an agenda item at a meeting. At this time, we're gonna set aside 20 minutes to allow for somebody to anonymously, you know, nominate themselves for a role. And so you at least have that on record. You're not missing those opportunities that you have in front of people. Because I understand it. We have so many officers, we have so many organizations here at UNT that if I miss opportunities that I get out in front of folks, I know it's going to be a lot harder reaching all of you by email. Some people read emails, some people don't. Some people will read them really quickly and forget about it. You know, if I'm just relying on email communication about elections and transition, then I'm missing an opportunity. So those would be my kind of opinions on elections. But with elections, they need to roughly occur the same time each year. Again, it's important for consistency purposes as you move forward. It lends credence to what you're trying to do. Like, it's important that we do this in April, in the middle of April, not, well, we were super on top of it this year, so we decided to do it in February. It shouldn't be open to that. You should follow your Constitution on what your Constitution states about when you're doing elections, and then how you're doing elections. If you need to make changes in your process on elections, you need to go on, you know, to your Constitution and make those amendments. Because if it's not working for you now, chances are it's not going to work for that organization in the future. You know, there's an outdated method I think a lot of organizations have when it comes to voting, and that is all people are present. Well, how often are you getting 100% attendance? I would say when a lot of these constitutions are formed, it's kind of based upon like an ideal premise, that you're going to have max participation. But we know that that's not the case, and that with schedules the way they are, people can't make it to every single meeting. And so what are you doing to allow for proxy votes? You know, people that could vote via write-in or email or whatever the case may be. Are you putting too much pressure on an in-person vote? You know, do people not feel comfortable showing up and, you know, openly saying, I'm going to vote for her instead of you? You know, you have to think about the makeup of your organization, specifically where we're headed technology-wise, you know, those resources that are available to you. You know, chances are if you've been around for a while in your Constitution, whenever that was formed, there are different resources available to you now that could make for better voting processes. So you need to be looking at those things. You can't just rely on the fact that you're going to get 100% participation at a meeting in April. And then when those people are voted in, is that really indicative of what your organization wanted, or were those just the people that were there and that just happened to be the way the vote went down? So be kind of thinking about your voting processes and when those occur. I think having them in late April is a bit too late, if I'm just being honest. And I'm speaking to anybody that would actually watch this video as it's being taped as well. If we're waiting until the end of April, we're up against too many challenges. We're up against finals, we're up against graduation, we're up against, summer. And because ultimately it's not just about the elections, it's about what happens now when those people are in place. And so let's talk about the actual transition of what needs to occur. So your current officer groups, all right, need to be meeting as officer groups at this point in time of the semester. If you regularly do that, that's great. If you don't regularly meet just as an officer group, you need to start doing that if you haven't already. What you as an officer group need to be talking about are the roles and responsibilities of this transition. So let's just take, for instance, position by position. So for a treasurer, if you have a treasurer in your organization, what are the duties and responsibilities of transition for that treasurer? Well, number one, giving access to your new treasurer to access the bank account is absolutely important. It's vital. Most treasurers do not get around to doing that. So they need to be up on the procedures as to how you transfer somebody's name from account, to account. They need to take themselves off of the account. They need to put the new treasurer on the account. I would say the vast majority of our student organizations do not accomplish that in this current spring. So they come back in August and they're trying to get this done after the fact. It is much tougher. I will just, without going into the whole process, I will tell you that unless you have a current member on the account with you as a new person, they're not going to accept you just walking into Wells Fargo with this letter that says, I have permission to be on the account. They're going to want somebody that's currently on the account to be with them to back that up and verify it. And a lot of times we've missed that mark, it being in August. So with the treasurer, they need to be not only making sure that that process is happening, so they need to be either contacting our office or they need to be going on to OrgSync. And in the search bar on OrgSync, they need to type in the keywords checking account, and that's our verification form that they can fill out. We'll then process that for them, and they can go through that process. But it's much easier if you and I are both here during the current semester to go make that happen. And again, that's why waiting until the end of April is really hard, because a lot of us, a lot of students leave in the beginning of May. So that's an example for your treasurer. The other thing a treasurer needs to do is actually share the books, if you will. Are we keeping track of our expenses? Are we keeping track, of the revenue that we're bringing in? Where do we keep that? Is it on a secure spreadsheet, or are we just having like written receipt books? I would not recommend you having written receipt books. I lose something, all the time. I wouldn't want to lose, a receipt book with all our transactions in it. That's why it should be located, hopefully, in a spreadsheet or, some kind of a secure form. And so I need to not only be going over that with the new treasurer to explain this is how we've been doing things, I also need to go through it with the new treasurer about ways that we could improve that process. Are there shortcomings in our financial, dealings? And then at the end of it, we need to be sharing that document with the new treasurer so that they have it and they can store it. If you're gone and I can't get a hold of you, and you're the only person that ever had the form, then we're kind of screwed. So that from a treasurer standpoint, from a vice president standpoint, having that vice president sit down with the new vice president to go over their rules and responsibilities. A lot of times in our organizations, our vice president keeps track of a lot of different organizational things like meeting notes, because some of our organizations aren't big enough to have a secretary. And so if they're the ones that are kind of keeping track of rosters and who attends what, they need to be going over those lists with the new vice president and then sharing those resources with them so the new person is taken care of. You know, a vice president most likely is doing a lot more of the organizational kinds of things. And so if a vice president had some information to share or some recommendations on how that process could be better, they need to be sitting down and talking with that person. Same thing for the president. You know, your president is most likely handling registration. They're most likely administrators within OrgSync. They most likely are filling out event requests or meeting requests on OrgSync. They most likely are just the approval person for all sorts of different kinds of things, right? And so the president has a lot more to take care of. And so that president needs to be doing the following things. They need to go and talk with the new president about your org chart. Like, what does each officer position look like? Who do they report to? What are they in charge of? So you kind of understand what your organization runs. They need to be sharing the duties and responsibilities that they have as a president. They need to be sharing with the new president about how registration works. So, hey, new president, once you're put in OrgSync as the new president, you're going to start getting emails, you know, from student activities. Be on alert for these things. Registration for the fall typically happens in late July. Registration in the spring typically happens, you know, at the end of November. This is what we need to do for registration in the fall, and this is what we need to do for registration in the spring. It's important that we know these things because, again, the difference between you being registered on July 31st when we activate registration and you being registered in October is mainly because the groups that knew what was going on registered themselves in July. The groups that had no idea what was going on didn't catch wind of what was going on until they tried to reserve a room and they were denied. And so here we are in October. So going through the different procedures on how you register each semester. The president most likely is going to have the best relationship with the advisor. So what I would suggest is the president setting up a meeting with your advisor so that the two, you know, both the outgoing president, the incoming president, or even the whole incoming officer group can sit down with the advisor. You know, your advisor is much more than just somebody that is going to sign off on things, you know, for you. They do need to approve quite a few things, but they also could be there for really great advice if you need it. They could be really good for resources. But nevertheless, that advisor needs to know that you've had elections. The advisor needs to know who they are, and the advisor needs to meet with these people. If I don't know you and you start emailing me, well, what's the connection there? You know, how invested as an advisor would I feel if all of this stuff was going on and you didn't give me a heads up even? And so again, that's a big thing that we forget about, is that it's not just about the students, it's about your advisor as well, that they need to be roped into this so that they're aware of what's going on. With the president, like I said, they probably have administrative privileges on OrgSync. And so they need to give administrative privileges to that new president. And so they need to go on OrgSync, they need to go onto their organization portal page, and go to the people section and, you know, identify who that new president is, click on that person's name and give them administrative rights. Because only administrators can re-register your organization. Only administrators, all right, can access the event request forms. So that needs to happen. And again, if you are delayed on a given semester, most likely it was, I am a new president, I don't have administrative privileges, can you make me an administrator? Well, by then, like I said, we're way past, you know, an advantageous time for you to get, you know, registered, because you're missing out on room reservations, ideal room reservations. You're missing out on opportunities to get involved in different events. You're just missing out on really good opportunities to have a presence on campus. So, you know, it's important that administrative privileges are given to the new president. And again, if anybody ever had a question about that, all they have to do is contact Student Activities, and we'll help you out with that. But just kind of failing to do that or forgetting about it, I mean, that new person is not going to just inherently know what's going on. So, passing of administrative privileges on OrgSync is very important. All right. And so, as an organization, as you make that transition, I think it's important that as a whole group, your old officers are in a meeting with your new officers to have a collective conversation about that. About this is where we've been, and this is where we want to go. You know, these are the pieces of information that we want to share with you as we leave. Now, a lot of officers have like a one-year appointment, and then they're still in the organization because they're still a student here, and they're just back to just general, you know, membership. What you want to occur at this meeting, this group meeting of officers, is that everybody's cool with the transition. That there's not going to be this like lingering animosity, that there's not just this like passive aggressiveness, that, oh yeah, you know, like you're going to do great, but you like secretly think they're going to do a terrible job. That's going to come through throughout that semester. Like you're a general member, but you're going to be pretty vocal, and you're not going to be the greatest to deal with. And so what you want to occur at that meeting is that we're all on the same page moving forward. It's all out there. You know, most new officers want to become officers because they've seen something that they want to change, right? Like ideally, we have people that we inspire to, you know, they too can be a leader, and we've really inspired them. Unfortunately, it can be said, especially in our professional life, that we learn the most by our supervisors' mistakes. And so it's no different in our organizations. You know, I want to become an officer because I, quite frankly, am not happy with the way things are going. So it's not a slam dunk that everybody's just going to be kumbaya in this meeting and we're all friends. You know, we need to get those issues out on the table so that we can deal with them and we can squash them, so that moving forward, there's one voice, and that one voice are your new officers. It isn't, you know, Dan's show when Chris takes over. You know, when Chris takes over, it's Chris's show. It's not Dan's show anymore. And so I, as Dan, need to be supportive of Chris and give him every piece of information, every resource that I have, so that he can do at the same or better of a job than I did. So these are things that get lost in the transition shuffle. I don't want you as an organization to just say, well, I know I have to update OrgSync, so let's just take care of that. Because really, if they have access to OrgSync and they just kind of novicely understand how to navigate through, they could probably take care of things. But if that's all they're doing, then you failed, like you failed them. It's much more than just saying you need to do X, Y, Z. I mean, X, Y, Z is important, but you know, ultimately, having your new officers have a big picture of what's going on is going to be important. So, I will just close by this. I mean, what dates you need to be looking out for is you need to be thinking about when your elections are and when this transition is happening. You need to set a firm date as to when this is officially going to happen. When do these officers take office? Are you going to set dates to actually sit down one-on-one, officer and officer, and then a collective officer meeting? And then at that meeting, what are you going to cover? At that meeting, and then are you going to transfer administrative privileges and organize everything and do that? You need to set those out on a calendar. And they need to occur before the middle of May. They absolutely just do. It's been a long time since I've been a student, but you're currently students and you understand what your summer schedule looks like. And you understand that once you get your final grades back, you all exhale and say, oh, bring on the summer. And unfortunately or fortunately, you know, a lot of people's summer plans don't include their student organization. So you need to get this stuff done by the middle of May, or quite frankly, it's just not going to get done. So be putting out a schedule for those things. Keep in mind the next, important date for a new officer or new president to know about is the end of July. And that's when re-registration is going to start happening. And if you miss re-registration, then it's going to set you way back. We're very active, obviously, in the beginning of semesters, trying to book rooms. We're very active trying to, market our organizations at orientation and things of that kind. You don't want your registration to lapse, because that negatively affects your ability to do that. So, your next big day after that is the end of July. They need to know, and this is in a humble way, they need to know who I am. They need to know who Dan Goodwin is. I mean, I email our org presidents and I email our officers time to time. I always tell people this, that with over 400 student organizations, I'm not emailing to say hello. I would love to. I would love to be able to sit down and talk with all of our organizations, but we have too many people. So usually when I am emailing, it is about something very important. And so we need to make sure that those new officers, that those new presidents are reading my emails, because that's going to set them back. So even over the summer, they need to be aware to be checking their email. And then my last point in all of this is on matters of eligibility. So nothing will halt your progress in new officer transition more than people being ineligible. So I just want to quickly go over the 3 things about eligibility. Number 1, to be an officer in a student organization here at UNT, you have to have a minimum GPA, cumulative UNT GPA of a 2.4. If you do not have that GPA, you will automatically be deemed ineligible, and you will have to go through, if you so choose, an appeal process. You as a current officer do not have the right to request grades from your fellow officer. It's confidential. They don't have to share that. You're not allowed to request that. However, they need to know from you, if you're not telling me the truth and you have a GPA under a 2.4, you're going to be deemed ineligible and you're going to get a notice. And you are going to have to go through an appeal process that is not a given that we're going to grant your appeal. The fact that we elect officers that are ineligible blows my mind. Number 1, it's going to stunt your growth. That's going to stop you dead in your tracks. Number 2, it's embarrassing for the officer to go through it. It's not a fun conversation, having a conversation with a student, say, you're doing a really great job in this organization, however, you're ineligible. Number 3, to go in front of an objective party of appeal committee that is not me, I don't vote, to state your case as to why you should be deemed eligible, that's a hard deal. You might have had personal things going on, in your life. You might have had things going on that you just really, quite frankly, are uncomfortable talking about. Well, you have to kind of muster up the strength, to go through that process, and it's not great. And like I said, it's not a given that you're going to be approved. And for our organizations to kind of just either knowingly or unknowingly go through with this transition in that way, it sets your organization up for failure. All right, so please, as you're going through these election processes or the transition, make sure that those students are eligible. And that's the number 1 reason why a student would be deemed ineligible, is their GPA. A couple other things would be, are they in good standing with the university? All right, again, they only can be truthful on that. And then there's an hours thing going on. So For undergraduate students, you have to be enrolled in at least 6 hours. For a graduate student, you have to be enrolled in at least 3 hours. Now, if you are graduating that semester and you only need like one class, we're not going to make you enroll in another class just so you're eligible. That doesn't even really need an appeal as much as we just need an explanation. Same thing for a graduate student. You know, if they're finishing up and they just, you know, have dissertation hours or whatever the case may be, they just need to be able to explain that to us, and we'll go on from there. But, you know, I just wanted to touch on the eligibility as the last thing because, you know, aside from transition not actually happening, ineligible officers is the next biggest thing as to why we have a rough go of it. So as you go forward in transition and you go forward in elections and you're ushering in these new officers, they not only need to be telling you the truth and they need to be meeting eligibility as we've stated it, but then they also need to understand the importance of it going forward, because it's going to be that cycle. All right, like they can't take it for granted. They can't, you know, say to themselves, well, they certainly don't check everybody. I mean, we do. We check all 2,100 officers. All right, so you know, we don't miss, you know, we don't miss people, and so people just need to be upfront and honest in that. So at this point, I don't have anything else to share about officer transition. You know, you're going to have a next busy month or so. Hopefully you've been making plans in advance of this so that it's not so overwhelming. But I think transition done in an appropriate and right way is going to set your organization up for the future, because that's going to ensure a good process year after year. You know, it's not that we want to be an organization 10 years from now. It's we want to be an organization 1 year from now, and then the next year, and then the next year after that. You got to take it year by year, all right? And by doing this, I really do feel that you will be an organization that will be around 10 years, because you will have put the work in. So thank you so much for being here, and if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to.